Mr. Chair, it is 9:30. I do believe you have quorum.
Thank you very much, Christopher. So we do have quorum. We will run through the roll call regardless. So given that it's 9:30, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Tuesday, June 16th, 2020 meeting of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management. Incredibly, our first meeting of 2020. So I'll start by asking Chris to take roll call.
Councillor Brockington,
I'm here.
Councillor Cloutier,
Présent.
Councillor DeRuse,
Here.
Councillor Eglai. We'll give him a few moments. Councillor Hubley,
Here.
Councillor King,
Here.
Councillor McKinney,
Present.
Vice Chair Menard,
Present.
and Councillor Moffat.
Here.
So the only one we're potentially missing so far is Councillor Eglai.
Right. See Councillor Kavanaugh's joined us as well. So thank you very much for that. So we'll be ready and willing when Councillor Eglai joins us. I just wanted to start today, and I believe this was mentioned at the last Transportation Committee, but it is relevant to Environment Committee as well. Just want to congratulate the Transportation Services Group under Phil Landry, specifically Omar Chaudhry and Greg Kent. The City of Ottawa was awarded Transportation Association of Canada's Environmental Achievement Award for their Eco Drive 2 project just recently, just to give you a sense of what that exactly is. It's a project that showed how connected vehicle technologies can help drivers reduce fuel consumption and emissions. City fleet vehicles were equipped to receive real-time traffic control information, and in-vehicle displays showed drivers how to adjust their speed and reach the next intersection during a green signal. Fuel savings averaged about 5%, representing significant financial and environmental benefits. So congratulations to staff on that award. So we'll move to the agenda. So declarations of interest. There are none. Confirmation of minutes for the meeting of Tuesday, December 17th, 2019. Are those minutes carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you so much. So we have two items on the agenda, and we're going to add a third. So the first item we'll have a presentation on, and Julie Robinson is here to do that for us. So it's Climate Change Master Plan, climate projections for the National Capital Region. This was released, these projections were released last Monday, so hopefully you had a chance to see those. Item 2, don't think we need to spend much time on. So it's the general accounts, water, wastewater, and stormwater write-offs. At the Standing Committee on Environment Protection, Water and Waste Management received this report on 2019 general accounts write-off for the years 2014 to 2019. So normally we would get this annually, but this one has come in after about cumulative 5 years. So $497,354 is required by the Delegation of Authority bylaw number 2019-280. Do we have any issues with this one, or can we carry this this report? Carried?
Carried.
All right, thank you so much. So carried on item number 2. And then you received a motion beforehand. I am going to ask that we add it right here as item number 3 on the agenda. So it's a motion from Councillor McKinney on the acceleration of the tree protection bylaw. So first, just that the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management suspend the rules of procedure pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw 2019-8 to permit the introduction of the following motion given the time-sensitive nature of the tree protection bylaws project schedule and the need to secure the necessary resources to effect the changes contemplated as part of the motion. So I'll get, the motion was circulated. I will ask Councillor McKenney to introduce the motion, but just on the rules of procedure being waived to add this as item 3 on our agenda.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you so much. Councillor McKenney, if you just want to, so we'll come back to this as item number 3. We'll do item 1 first. We'll come back as item 3. Just want to give us a quick synopsis of what this is at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Happy to. And thanks for your work on getting it onto this agenda. I worked closely with staff over the last month, really, on this motion. I was sensitive to the fact that a lot of the staff have been redeployed as a result of COVID and wanted to ensure that what we were asking for would be able to be accommodated through the staffing. So essentially with COVID and the redeployment of staff, the tree bylaw protection, that phase 2 that looked at the size of the tree that we were going to start to protect in the city got pushed off to Q3 2021. You know, just in that short period of time, just in my ward alone, I had a number of trees on one street that were just under that 50 centimeter diameter removed. Quite a devastating impact on an urban street, as you can imagine. So worked with staff, and this is essentially bringing the tree protection bylaw that deals with the distinctive tree permit to January 1st, 2021, rather than Q3 2021. That will protect trees now over 30 centimeters.
All right, thank you for that. So we will get to that again as item number 3, and we'll have staff here on that file as well, just to give it a bit of an introduction and a refresher as to what it is and why it's before us today. So I'll go back to item 1, which is the Climate Change Master Plan, climate projections for the National Capital Region, which was
Councillor, did you want to go through the IPDs?
I'll do it at the end. So the climate projections for the National Capital Region, which was a joint effort involving the city and the NCC. So Julia Robinson is here, and I will allow you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to present an overview of the findings of this report. My name is Julia Robinson, and I work in the Climate Change and Resiliency team. So the presentation this morning includes some context for the report, a summary of the methodology and key findings, implications for Ottawa, and next steps. Next slide, please. In April 2019, Ottawa City Council declared a climate emergency to deepen our commitment to climate action. This was in part in response to global and national reports that provide the scientific evidence for the need to limit global warming increases to 1.5 degrees. With Council's declaration of a climate emergency, staff were directed to take action to both reduce emissions, our contribution to climate change, and prepare for changing climate conditions, or reduce the impacts of climate change on Ottawa. Next slide.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. I'm not seeing the slides. I wonder if the clerk could put them up. This is Matt speaking here.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be sharing the screen. So if we could get the screen shared so that we can have the presentation on the screen, because right now I'm just staring at people's faces. Which is fine, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on the next slide, please. Council approved the Climate Change Master Plan in January 2020. This plan provides the overarching framework that guides how Ottawa will both mitigate and adapt to climate change over the coming decades. Mitigation refers to the need to reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Adaptation refers to the need to adapt to changing climate today and to build resiliency for the future. The majority of the city's work to date has been on the mitigation side. We've completed community and corporate greenhouse gas inventories, set greenhouse gas reduction targets, and are developing Energy Evolution, the strategy and action plan for how to achieve these targets. The climate projection study is the first milestone in developing a climate resiliency strategy. This strategy will assess where Ottawa is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and identify actions to build resiliency to the greatest climate risks. Next slide. Over the past decades, Ottawa has been experiencing warmer, wetter, and more unpredictable weather. Average temperature has risen by 1.3 degrees since the 1940s. Precipitation has also increased, with great year-to-year variability. In the last decade, the city has also experienced a range of weather extremes. So for example, the Rideau Canal had both its longest and its shortest openings. 2017 was our wettest spring on record, with severe flooding along the Ottawa River, which occurred again in 2019. In 2018, there were 6 continuous days of extreme heat around Canada Day. And of course, the tornadoes in 2018 and 2019 that caused extensive damage and power outages. The climate science tells us that these trends will continue. Next slide, please. So why did we complete this study? Although national and regional data is increasingly available, we wanted a comprehensive set of local data to support climate adaptation planning in the region. Having a consistent set of local data saves costs and time. We sought advice from climate experts on what information was needed and how to understand and manage data uncertainty. And we wanted a report that would be useful to a wide range of users and sectors. Next slide, please. The study was conducted as a partnership with the National Capital Commission. Together, we commissioned climate scientists at CBCL Limited to undertake this study, and we were fortunate to have the technical advice throughout the project from the Canadian Centre for Climate Services at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Staff from many departments at the city and NCC were involved, as well as Gatineau and the conservation authorities, so we would develop a report that would meet diverse needs. Next slide. This study uses the most up-to-date climate science and modeling tools available in Canada. It provides a comprehensive analysis of changes in temperature, precipitation, wind, humidity, and extreme events. 4 time horizons were selected. We compared baseline conditions with the 2030s, 2050s, and 2080s to cover a range of planning timeframes. The study also uses 2 emission scenarios that are based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. Currently, global emissions are following the high emission scenario, and we know that significant global action is required to reduce emissions to the moderate scenario. Next slide. The study used a combination of methodologies. Global and regional climate models were downscaled to assess local changes in temperature, precipitation, wind, and humidity. And scientific studies were used to examine future trends in extreme events, since these are not well captured by models. Next slide. We now have detailed analysis of future climate conditions to 2100. These projections give us a clear understanding of how Ottawa's weather will change in the coming decades. This slide includes a simplified summary of the projections for the high emission scenario. Overall, the National Capital Region will become warmer and wetter, and I'll highlight some examples from the projections for the 2050s. Warming is anticipated across all seasons. Summers will be much hotter, and for example, by the 2050s, there will be 4 times as many very hot days, or days above 30 degrees. This means an increase from 11 days per year to 44 days per year. The timing of seasons will shift. Winters will be shorter by 5 weeks, and springs will be earlier by 2 weeks. And the number of freeze-thaw events will increase in winter by 33%. The total amount of precipitation is anticipated to increase in all seasons except summer. Rainfall is expected to increase both in volume and intensity. One measure of intense precipitation is the maximum amount of rain that will fall in one day, and this is projected to increase by 14% by the 2050s. Conversely, there will be less snowfall. By the 2050s, total annual snowfall will decrease by 20%. And finally, while the uncertainty is greater for projecting extreme events, future conditions favor an increase in extreme weather, such as freezing rain, tornadoes, storms, or droughts. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for Ottawa? This study did not examine specific risks and vulnerabilities, as this will occur in the next phase of the project. However, potential impacts are generally well known. So Ottawa could see more heat waves and heat-related illnesses, longer, warmer seasons that extend agricultural and construction, but also impact ecosystems and increase the risks for Lyme disease, West Nile virus, or invasive species. We could see shorter, warmer winters with less snow and more freeze-thaw cycles that impact winter recreation and damage roads and other infrastructure. And we'll see shifting energy demands with lower heating requirements in the winter and higher cooling demands in the summer. Next slide, please. The greater likelihood of extreme weather, such as wind bursts, freezing rains, or storm, has broad impacts on people, infrastructure, and services. More intense precipitation can overwhelm our sewer systems and increase the risk of flooding and erosion. And infrastructure and buildings will need to be built to resist warmer temperatures, more precipitation, and stronger winds. Next slide, please. The report presented today completes the first step in a three-step process to develop a climate resiliency strategy. We will use the climate projections to understand where we are vulnerable and identify ways to reduce risks. This includes examining our current adaptation measures to see if they are adequate. We'll work with all departments and external stakeholders to examine impacts on communities, infrastructure, the economy, and the natural environment. And this work will start in 2020. As mentioned in the previous slide, the vulnerability assessment includes examining whether our existing adaptation measures are adequate in light of new climate projections. The city already has many measures in place to reduce risks and adapt to climate change. So this slide highlights a few of those examples. So public health and emergency preparedness, and in particular for support to vulnerable populations. We have updated floodplain mapping done in concert with the conservation authorities to support our flood risk management. The urban forest management plan that protects our tree canopy. The combined sewage storage tunnel that will reduce combined sewer overflows. And upgrades to ROPEC so we can operate independently of the power grid during an extended power outage. And finally, we do provide support to residents, for example, through grants for backwater valves to protect against basement flooding or controlled tile drains that help farmers manage water levels on their fields. Next slide, please. While the overall vulnerability assessment is being completed, the climate projections will also be considered in plans and programs that are currently under review or under development. So for example, the climate projections are being used in the development of the official plan and the supporting master plans for infrastructure, transportation, green space, and parks. They will be used for the development of asset management plans on an infrastructure design standards. And they'll be used for the review of winter maintenance standards and practices. Next slide, please. One more, please, Chris. Thank you. Our intent is to share the report widely to encourage understanding and use. The report was made available on Monday, June 8th on both the City and NCC websites. It was featured in several online and radio media outlets as a result of a joint news release. It's also been promoted through social media by the City, Ottawa Public Health, and NCC channels, and shared through the City's Climate Change e-newsletter, which has more than 3,000 subscribers. We will continue to engage staff, stakeholders, and residents during the vulnerability assessment and development of the climate resiliency strategy. Next slide, please. So in closing, the climate projection study is an important milestone to support efforts across Ottawa and indeed the National Capital Region to understand how climate change will impact the region and put in place measures to reduce climate risks and build resiliency for the future. Work will now begin on the vulnerability assessment, and the climate resiliency strategy and action plan will be developed once the vulnerability assessment is completed. We will provide an update on progress as part of the climate change master plan updates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Appreciate that presentation. Yes, so obviously this is an important piece as we lead into work to prepare for the climate resiliency strategy for the City of Ottawa going forward. So I don't believe, just confirming that with Chris, I don't believe we have any speakers registered on this matter.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
All right, so if you'd like to ask questions, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom. Or you can just wave at me so I can see your face because I'm not seeing it.
Councillor, I'm seeing Councillors Brockington, Menard, and Cloutier waving their hands.
I don't see it. So we'll go to Councillor Menard first. Thank you.
I think Councillor Brockington had his hand up first. Go for it, Councillor Brockington.
Okay. No need to fight over it, guys. Go ahead, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Menard. I just have a few questions. First of all, thank you to staff. It's one of the more comprehensive reports I've seen, and certainly no shortage of data to feed into your report. I won't be here in 2100, so I won't see the end result of all the work that you've done, but certainly appreciate the different points in time that you've spelt out. Like I said, just a few questions. One of the vulnerability assessments that you're going to do is on the physical infrastructure. Hydro is not listed, but I'm going to assume that Hydro Ottawa's capital assets will be part of that assessment. Can you just confirm that?
So we have been working with many external stakeholders as we've been developing this project, including in particular to see where they are in their respective work. So Hydro Ottawa is also in the process of doing a vulnerability assessment and determining an adaptation plan. And we will continue to coordinate and work closely with them to align our efforts.
Will their findings be embedded in your future reports, or will their findings be separate and reported separately to us?
I think that will be determined as we're mapping out steps to actually do it, but we will work closely with them so that we are sharing all of our information and working together on developing the most appropriate responses.
I think everyone will agree the importance of doing a vulnerability assessment. You can't map out the next number of decades without understanding the types of risks that we're under. I want to know whether there is going to be an assessment of opportunities because of climate change. And I'm not saying that because I embrace climate change, but when you look at the extension of agricultural periods, if the temperature is going to be warmer, then maybe there's going to be a reduced dependence on fossil fuels to heat our homes and buildings. Maybe tourism gets extended. Like there are some, if we're factoring in the long term here, which includes potential economic benefits, is that being considered as well?
Yes, we will look at both opportunities, and we will look at both the positive and the negative side of impact, so opportunities as well. And as you point out, opportunities in terms of the economy are one area that we will be looking at. And I think this also reinforces the importance of working in partnership with the community and with external stakeholders. And one of the reasons we wanted to make this report available right now was so that external partners can start using this information for their own assessments. But we will, through the process, be working with external partners.
So just to be clear, future reports will not only include vulnerability assessments, but you will have data and statements on economic or other type of opportunities.
Yes, Councillor, our intent is to look at impacts and opportunities on the community, on infrastructure, on the economy, and the natural environment.
My last question, and I don't know if you can answer this now or whether the additional reports will answer this, but I want to know whether the City of Ottawa is more at risk, less at risk, or about the same compared to other Canadian cities our size. Are you going to be able to make a conclusion based on that?
Part of the vulnerability assessment will be looking at other cities and the risk assessments they have done and the strategies that they are using. So we will definitely be looking at other comparable cities, and particularly those that share similar climate regions, as part of that assessment.
Where are we compared to other cities as far as doing this type of work, the vulnerability assessments? Are we ahead of the pack, in the middle? Are we way behind?
Other cities across Canada have already completed vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans. I think Ottawa's approach has been a bit different in that, as I was highlighting in the presentation, there are many initiatives underway where risk assessments include looking at climate risks as well. And the purposes of the vulnerability assessment that we'll be doing now will be to take a look at the existing measures, see if they're adequate, and identify additional gaps.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And we'll go next to Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's a very important one. Really underscores the need for us to take action. There are 3 phases in building climate resiliency that you've outlined. The first is the future climate conditions, which is this report. The second is the assessing risks and vulnerabilities, and the third is the resiliency strategy and action plan to address the key risks. I'm just wondering, in terms of phase 2 and phase 3, what is your timeline on bringing that forward? And are we going to see those this term?
So the vulnerability assessment will start immediately. We're scoping out the methodology for that. And the intent is to start that now, to have that completed likely in early in 2021, and then move that into the development of the strategy. We don't have specific timelines at this point because we are still scoping out how that will be done, how we're going to work with external partners, the level of assessment in terms of vulnerability, but also risk assessments. But we can commit to bringing forward an update on timelines as part of the update to the climate change master plan.
And okay, that's helpful. The more we can get done this term, the better. And obviously we want to do it right, but the piece around the risk assessment, Ottawa has previously looked at some of its risks associated with climate change, and one of the top one that comes out every single time is around flooding. Is that still your sort of assessment going into this? I know we're going to do a full assessment, but is it still your assessment that flooding is the number one risk associated with the changing climate for the city of Ottawa, or are there other pieces that just from a top level you're seeing?
Mr. Willis, take the chair.
Excuse us as we do our social distancing repositioning here. So council raises a really good question. So what the data is showing is that there are 2 very significant things the city has to pay attention to among many. There are actually 3 things that are coming out of this, and Julia can correct me if I'm wrong. Flooding still is very much at the top of the list. And we do expect that we will have, and we have been for several years, accounting for climate change, even without this data, in all the new engineering for any new structures we're building. And as we rebuild, we're putting climate change factors into the engineering design. The second is extreme heat in the summer, and there is a community social impact of extreme heat. And the third is invasive species that might come as a result of the climate changes as well, being the top 3 to pay attention to, and they affect, all those 3 affect virtually every city operation in some way or another.
Okay, thank you for that. I mentioned this is an important report, and again underscores our need to take action. FCM has estimated that there needs to be an annual investment of national GDP of at least 0.26% of national GDP required to be cost shared by all orders of government, and that they're saying that those financial requirements are needed to implement cities' action plans and take into consideration these risk assessments and identify future budgets. And so on that point, one of the ways that we're funding our climate change master plan and some of this work going forward is through the Hydro Ottawa dividend surplus. So I have a couple questions about that. Can staff confirm the Hydro Ottawa dividend surplus amount for this year?
I'm sorry, Councillor, we don't have information, and I can't answer that question. That question will have to be, the treasurer will answer that when she has that information available, but we don't have that information at this point.
Okay, because my understanding is that it forms about 90% of the implementation budget of the climate change master plan, and really essential for delivering results this term. Do staff have any intent of repurposing that funding, or is the current projection to keep that funding intact for the purpose that we had set out very early in the term to fund the climate change master plan and energy evolution?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't have an answer to that question. As you know, the Treasurer is in the process of reviewing all city finances in all levels and all departments, and that question is best directed to the Treasurer when she reports to Council on the financial situation. So I just don't have the answer, and I can't give you a definitive answer today.
Okay, then I guess just let me express an opinion around this, because it seems to me this funding is valuable, and not just because it goes towards this obviously extremely important priority that we don't have other funding for, but it also can be leveraged for matching funding, particularly federally, but also through organizations like FCM and GMF, and it can also spur potential savings depending on how we utilize it. That can bring savings over time, 5-year returns back to the city. And so I wouldn't want to see a repurposing of the Hydro Ottawa dividend surplus because of the potential that it brings in versus other funds that don't have that potential to offset our costs or to find matching funding. So I think if there's going to be something brought forward, it shouldn't come from this pot. If it did come from this pot, it should be a very, very minor amount that would come out of it. And certainly not, from what I'm hearing, around 2 million, shouldn't be chipping away at that. It's important, I think, that we recognize the need for repetitive, that going forward how much funding is there to be able to implement this. If you have something where you're saying, here's our plan, but we're going to have this amount of funding, then it's going to go down, it may go back up again, it's not consistent. It's very hard to plan that way when you don't have a consistency of funding. And so in this case, given the massive challenges in front of us, that dividend surplus is still just a drop in the bucket of what's needed in the investment that can, again, bring us returns. So just to underscore the importance of that moving forward for the climate change master plan and our energy evolution plan when that comes forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I know that we do have the Treasurer's Office on call today. Ms. Stephenson is here, so I imagine that she did hear your points to that. And I think it's important because you look back to last term of council, and certainly there was some work involved from Councillor Eglai and myself to look at not the dividend itself, but that surplus, that above and beyond the 20 million that we factor in every year into our budget, but the extra funds that come from that. And we put forward a motion at the beginning of this term that would state that the surplus would be dedicated to our energy evolution projects and our climate initiatives, important items through this committee that we've been doing that really line up well with energy funding. We're talking about surplus funding from the energy sector going toward energy initiatives that council has approved. So that was certainly the guidance that was provided for this term of council, if I'm not mistaken, unanimously by council when that motion came forward from myself and Councillor Eglai. So we'll certainly have to keep an eye on that as to how we move forward. And ideally, that funding comes to where council intended it to, because if we don't get it now, then we're just looking for it later. And the sooner we move forward on some of these projects, the better off that we will be in the long term. So thank you, Councillor Bernard. Councillor Kluche, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Robinson, for your presentation and for the report on the climate projections for Ottawa. They're truly staggering for the ecology, for agriculture, the economy. There's not a lot of mentions of dollars and cents, which is not really what the report is about, but is a very real concern for people. And I appreciate the questions by Councillor Brockington with respect to the overall infrastructure, hydro. Mentions a bit about how weather extremes will have an impact on properties. Was there ever an average increased cost estimate for individual residents that they or their insurance would have to shoulder from the damage of more extreme weather?
At this stage in the assessment of the project, we don't have information on financial impacts for individual residents, but I think we've all seen through the examples over the last decades how costly it can be for residents when they are impacted, particularly by extreme events. So that will be one of the considerations that we'll be looking at as we're moving forward in the vulnerability assessment, as we're looking at costs of initiatives, but also the potential cost savings that can come by taking preventative measures to protect the community.
Very, very good point, because as we recognize that more investments will have to be made by all levels of government, including municipality, that there is an absolute benefit to mitigate the impacts of weather extremes now, and it's to the benefit of all taxpayers. It's not an expense, it's an investment. And the report mentions best practices for infrastructure. Are we in communication with provincial authorities with respect to things like the building code and how the building code might have to change with respect to mitigating the impacts of weather extreme for future builds?
So there are updates being done to both the national and then the provincial building codes that are looking exactly at how we build resiliency in our buildings to climate change. So the benefit of the approach of the vulnerability assessment and the strategy within the city is that we will work closely with departments all the way through the city, and they are the staff that are then having those conversations and working closely with their either other municipal or provincial or federal counterparts.
Okay, I guess the same applies to our building standards for things like road. If there's more intense weather events, more rainfall, more freeze thaw, that will certainly have an impact on the heaving of the roads and the substructure that supports our roads and our other infrastructure with respect to freeze thaw cycles and high heat and items like that. So I would look to getting more information on how those standards will change so that infrastructure can better withstand the impact of the changes, the climate change that we are seeing.
Absolutely, that will be considered both in terms of infrastructure design standards for new infrastructure, but also reviewing and looking at our maintenance and our operation practices and standards.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Thank you, Chair.
Very much, Councillor Cloutier. We're actually going to go to Councillor McKenney next, and then Councillor King. I know Councillor King just unmuted himself, but Councillor McKenney had given me the old school wave. So go ahead, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a comment and one question. Much of what many of us were considering, I think, has already been raised by our colleagues. But the comment I'm going to make is on ongoing funding that will lead us in the right direction here. And I know that we're in a difficult time right now, and the entire world has been thrown into a state of downturn. But in this city and cities pretty much across North America, at least, we do have two emergencies, and that's a climate emergency and a housing emergency. And the reason we're in those two emergencies is because successive governments over the last several decades have not invested in either at a rate that was required to keep us from getting to where we are today. And it's as my colleagues have pointed out, some of the when we're looking at the scenarios for temperature and change in seasons and precipitation going forward, it is really rather alarming. So my comment is just that, when we're considering moving forward and funding, we can pay now or we can pay later, but we are going to pay. So we can pay some now or a lot later. Similar to housing. That's why we're in the emergencies that we're in today. So I just wanted to make that comment, to be on record that I expect that we will continue to move forward with our plans in a way that that at least reduces and our risk and increases our resilience going forward. And just a question to Julia. I just want to understand the phasing, the timing of the phasing, and how it aligns with some of the most important work we're doing also this term, the official plan, the master plans for infrastructure, transportation. We know that has significant impacts on climate and on our resilience, any strategies for resilience. So I just wonder how you see the phase 2 and especially phase 3 aligning on time to inform our decisions on the official plan, and also very much in particular the transportation master plan and the infrastructure master plan going forward.
The timing is very much aligned with making sure that we are feeding in this information to inform these very key reports that you're referring to. So climate resiliency is one of the key themes that is already being considered as part of the official plan. It's in our approved preliminary policy directions, and there are policies being developed right now that take in consideration these projections. And as you mentioned, the supporting master plans, and in particular, the infrastructure and the transportation master plans will be key in terms of prioritizing which infrastructure projects are going forward. So as part of this initiative and by working closely with staff from all departments, both in terms of generating the right information in this report so that they would have that information for the assessments they are doing. So we are working very closely through an internal working group to make sure that these projections are being considered and embedded in the development of those master plans and in other critical corporate plans moving forward in the next number of years.
Okay, that's very good to hear. So I just to confirm then that we will have that resiliency strategy in time to inform us on, say, our transportation master plan.
The approach that we're taking with our vulnerability and risk assessments is, in addition to that citywide one that will identify gaps, we're embedding it in all of the opportunities that we have across city business. So again, that allows us to undertake a vulnerability assessment at that high overarching level, but also do the detailed risk assessments where appropriate through ongoing city plans and programs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we will go to Councillor King, which in case I had a conversation with Councillor King a few weeks ago when we were on our Ottawa Community Housing Board meeting. And if you're wondering what that background is, that is a massive record collection. And as soon as the provincial government allows us to gather in groupings of up to 24, he is inviting every single member of council to listen to every single record. Councillor King?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking forward to us moving forward with these stages of reopening so that I can invite people, because I get questions all the time about what's behind me. And I have some turntables as well over to the side that are I unfortunately don't get a lot of time to utilize. I think that this is the high irony. Once you can afford a few of these, you don't get any time to play them. But thank you so much for the opportunity to ask staff some questions on this really in-depth report. I really appreciate the depth of the work that has been undertaken. And the question that I had really deals with, I guess, the future vulnerability and risk assessment reports that will be done, and whether they will give due consideration to agriculture in our city, noting that we have a very unique city here with a tremendous amount of agricultural land. And some of the scientific reports that I've read in the past really do indicate that climate change will drastically impact the viability of agricultural lands in certain bands within the country. And so I was wondering if we are going to really take stock of that and really focus on that in some of the future risk assessments that will be undertaken.
We'll just do musical chairs for again.
So Councillor, that point is extremely well taken. And I think this was a point raised by one of the earlier councillors, and I apologize, I can't name the name, but we certainly are looking at the opportunities in Ottawa related to agriculture, because what we are seeing is that in Ottawa, unlike some other areas where access to water will still be good, the heat range is still manageable. We're seeing international interest in agriculture in the Ottawa area as being one of the areas that probably over the long run will be one of the more stable places. So we're actually quite fortunate, unlike other parts of Canada. And that's why, as an economic development initiative, and as part of the rural economic development strategy, we've been looking at the use of new technology in agricultural practices as part of this as well. But we are tracking the issue. It's not a completely clear path. There are risks associated with the extreme heats elements of it. And so the work will continue to look at this. But as we talked earlier, I think it was Councillor Brockington who might have raised the question about opportunities. This is actually an area where the news may be in the Ottawa context alone, one of the better parts of the story, but we have our other challenges, which we're very focused on as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I am still concerned about the potential negative risks to the agricultural lands and the impacts that climate change might have, whether it is due to the other primary risks that we're facing, such as flooding, impacts to water sources, and also just the impact on growability, the negative impact of climate change on the agricultural lands. So if we can see that reflected, at least in our risk assessments, it would be much appreciated.
And the councilor is quite correct. There are risks, and especially on water vulnerability, water supply. So we will absolutely be reporting on that. Ms. Robinson did confirm to me as she leaned over my shoulder at a safe distance and say, yes, it is part of this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. I do not see any other questions from members of the committee. So I just want to thank staff for their work on this file. I know it's an in-depth report. I think we all saw that, and I think that's a positive contribution to our future discussions that we will be having on this matter. So with that, before the item that the Standing Committee on Environment Protection, Water and Waste Management recommend that Council receive the report on the climate projections for the National Capital Region as summarized in this report and attached as document 1. Is that item received?
Received. Received.
Received. Thank you so much. Now we go to the added item, which is item number 3. I do just want to, what got us here. So you may recall, back in the fall, we had approved implementation for our tree bylaw. We had done some improvements. Staff had worked heavily on some improvements, working with a number of stakeholders on this file throughout 2019, and came forward with a plan for implementation. That implementation day was to be May 1st, 2020, and due to obvious reasons, we ended up having to delay that. There was a plan to hire staff, to train staff, and clearly with the situation before us in March and April, that was not possible. So in the months that followed, and the weeks and months that followed, I know Councillor McKenney had seen some impacts in her area, in the ward that she represents, downtown in Somerset, and had worked with staff to come up with a solution that can allow us to move forward with our originally intended implementation plan, but just altered, recognizing that COVID is changing some of the ways that we do business at the city, and we'll have to change some of the ways we do business, and looking at how we could manage this, knowing that this was a commitment of council, certainly for this term of council, to get this moving. So I will first, I have Martha Copestake here, but before, I just will ask Councillor McKenney to completely introduce your motion. So read the full full motion so that we understand the background and what the resolution is here today.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's coming up in front of you. I can go ahead and start reading because I have it in front of me too. Whereas the city's urban forest management plan approved by council on June 28th, 2017 was established to provide a structured approach to protecting and enhancing the environmental, social, and economical services provided by the urban forest and to ensure that it is healthy and robust into the future. The city's urban forest management plan includes a recommendation for staff to undertake a tree bylaw review. And whereas a tree bylaw review project report approved by council on January 29th, 2020 responds to this recommendation by proposing a new harmonized tree bylaw to support the protection and enhancement of the city's urban tree canopy and includes a planned phased approach for implementation. And whereas phase 1 of the new tree protection bylaw aimed at improving tree protection requirements, formalizing compensation requirements, improving submission requirements, increasing application fees to offset implementation costs, and instituting a new special fine designed to eliminate or reduce any economic or financial gain from contravening the bylaw was to come into effect on May 1st, 2020. And whereas phase 2 of the new tree protection bylaw outlining the final proposed changes to the bylaw, including decreasing the diameter limit for distinctive trees from 50 centimeters to 30 centimeters for the inner urban area and creating a permit to work around trees, was to be presented to council in Q3 2020 for implementation in 2021. And whereas work on the tree protection bylaw requires procedural and administrative tasks to be done by staff who have been fully or partially redeployed to support the response to and recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas the redeployment of these staff originally resulted in a modified project schedule with a tentative implementation date of November 1st, 2020 for phase 1 and a report to council in Q3 2021 for phase 2. And whereas upon further discussion with staff and senior management, it has been indicated that barring a second wave of COVID-19 requiring another deployment of key staff, it would be feasible to enact on January 1st, 2021, the tree protection bylaw, including the reduction in the distinctive tree diameter from 50 centimeters to 30 centimeters for the inner urban area. That is the urban areas within the green belt, originally to be contemplated as part of phase 2. And whereas despite the devastating impacts of COVID-19, the protection of trees remains a priority for the City of Ottawa and its residents, necessitating continuance of work on the tree bylaw review to align as closely as possible with the original timelines presented to Council in January 2020. Therefore, be it resolved that Council directs staff to amend the new tree protection bylaw to come into force and take effect on January 1st, 2021, and to reduce the size of a distinctive tree from 50 centimeters to 30 centimeters in diameter at breast height in the new bylaw. And be it further resolved that Council direct the general managers of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development and Public Works and Environmental Services to hire up to 4 temporary resources, 3 in Public Works and 1 in Planning, Infrastructure, Economic Development, required to implement the accelerated distinctive tree provisions outlined above using vacant positions until such time as permanent resources can be established in a future budget, using increased permit fee revenue and increased development fee revenues to result in a net zero budget impact.
Thank you very much for that. So I will now ask Martha Kopstake. Many of you will know that Martha has been the key lead on this file. Of course, her work with the tree canopy reports leading into this as well that we dealt with in 2019. So I'll ask Martha to provide just a quick overview of where things stand and what this means in terms of the original plan.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor McKenney. Chris, I will put that slide that I had up. Could you put that up for me now? Thank you. All right, so that motion did go through a lot of detail. It was a very detailed motion, so I don't have much background, I think, other than that. I prepared this slide to just show basically, like, from a timeline perspective, what we're looking at here. I should say off the bat that staff do support this motion. As Councillor McKenney indicated, we've been working with her on this. And, you know, it was unfortunate that the first phase of the tree bylaw had to be delayed from its May date. And so what you see here on this slide that I've done is basically the first column is what our pre-pandemic plan was. And Councillor McKenney went over that. We were planning to have our phase 1 implemented in May, and then we would come forward this fall with a report on phase 2, which takes the main thing in that is taking it down, the distinctive trees down to 30 centimeters, and then we would implement that in January 2021. With our adjusted staff plan, basically we adjusted to implementing the first phase in November, and then coming forward, basically keeping with those 2 phase things because of our resource requirements. So coming forward next September, so quite a delay with phase 2, and that's when the 30 centimeters thing would happen for implementation in January 2022. So then in the third column, you see the motion that's being discussed today. And you can see that essentially what it does is it brings us in line with our original timing, which we think is good because all of the things that we discussed at this committee in December regarding trees, all the issues, all the challenges still stand today. So the fact that we can have the potential to bring our timeline in line with what we had originally planned is definitely something that staff support. The only sort of outstanding item is that, excuse me, there's this one item, the permit to work around trees, which was to be a part of phase 2, which we will not, like, we haven't included in this motion. There's still some things that staff have to flesh out around that. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on that. There's also, it's a bit more resource intensive as well. So we want to take some time to look at that, and we'll come back and report on that and any other remaining items in next fall in this case. But otherwise, staff support this, and I'm here to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you so much for that, Martha. Appreciate your willingness to work on this, knowing that, you know, obviously we weren't in an ideal situation, but ultimately council was interested in getting to an outcome on this and finding a way to get there, really with a cost recovery model, getting to that same outcome, that same timeline, essentially, aside from the one thing that you mentioned there at the end. So just for some questions, we have Councillor Brockington is up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious to know why a motion is required. Was this not part of staff's plan, or is this?
No, so staff's plan would have been to come back to us in the fall. So with reports on implementing stage 2. So it was the implementation. So council approved policy back in, or report back in January, would have had the implementation of phase 1 come in May 1st, and then another report coming back to this committee in the fall with the implementation of phase 2, January 1st. So what this does is it kind of couples phase 1 and phase 2 into one implementation on January 1st. So we didn't provide this direction to do it this way. This is just looking at how we could achieve the same goals, but in a different manner. And staff did not have the authority to do that without council direction.
So the net outcome is the same.
Yeah. It's just a different way of getting to an end result. But yeah, it's ultimately the same in the end of the day.
Okay. So the fact this was walked on, other stakeholders haven't had an opportunity to comment. At the end of the day, the final outcome would have been the same, and that was pre-known prior to today. Correct?
The outcome was known prior to today. That's correct.
Right.
So everyone that was involved in the drafting of the policy and the work that took place in 2019, the outcome that we're looking at today on January 1st is no different.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. This is more of a thank you comment than anything, because this is really important to for all the projects that are in infill coming in to Bay Ward. I was quite concerned when we had the delay, and I appreciate the work that Councillor McKenney has put into it, and Martha as well. Thank you very much. This is really important. These developments are not stopping and waiting for our delays. So I want to thank you for your effort on this, because it will make a difference. We've got properties right now that are being assessed, and this will be very helpful to save some trees in older urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. So, Councillor McKenney, do you want to provide any final comments on that before we vote on the motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks to my colleagues for supporting this. It does, the end result is the same. We did have the discussion around what our distinctive tree permit should look like, what those parameters should look like, and what types of trees we need to be saving in our urban environment. This does move it forward from post-COVID as a result of COVID, but the outcome is the same. But I mean, I think that I always have to emphasize that a loss of one tree in an urban area it can be devastating. And it changes a neighborhood, it changes a street. It has a significant impact on the health and well-being of the neighborhood on a variety of issues, whether it's cooling the street, traffic calming, aesthetics. It's cleaning the air. Every tree is absolutely essential. And I know that I want to thank staff, Martha and staff for working on this. I think sometimes I probably have a bit of a reputation as a crazy tree person, but it's we need to be able to breathe, and we sometimes lose trees to build bike lanes, and there's always that tension between the two. And and I tell people, as much as I like cycling lanes, I want to breathe when I'm cycling as well. So trees, there's always a good reason to cut down a tree. And I say this every time I speak about trees, because I get a good reason at least once a week, once every 2 weeks, somebody comes to me with a really good reason why a certain tree needs to come down. And if we didn't fight back the way that we do, our downtown would look very different. And it's a constant and ongoing struggle to keep trees healthy and alive in our urban core for a variety of reasons. So this will go a long way to keeping our urban tree canopy healthy and allowing us to move forward to build it up the way that we want to, the way that we've committed to. So thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Chair. And staff, thank you so much for working on this. I know it took a lot of iterations. We've been at it for a little while, but it's very much appreciated across the sector. Thank you.
And thank you, Martha, for being here today as well to provide some input and some oversight on the process as well. I appreciate all the work that you do and your team does. So on that item from Councillor McKenney, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you very much. So we will now go on with the rest of the committee. So in-camera items, there are none at all. Information previously distributed. So we have our annual drinking water source protection status update. That's item A. B, our municipal drinking water systems 2019 summer reports. So on that one, we almost always have a report where we have 100% across the board, but on one place, it was 99.3% because of a bookkeeping matter. Bottom line is the water is still incredible in Ottawa, and we're all very fortunate. Of course, I don't drink it because I drink whatever comes out of my well. Such is life in rural Ottawa. Item C is our solid waste master.
Councillor DeRuse has a question.
Oh yeah, sure, Councillor DeRuse, by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question concerning the water quality report. I'm not sure if there is someone from the department is online concerning the Shadow Ridge 2 drinking water.
Yeah, Tammy Rose is here, Director of Water Services.
Perfect. Tammy, thank you very much. I know I've seen the numbers and I really appreciate I had a briefing yesterday morning concerning, but it looked like the numbers are very good. They're balancing. They're not very good. I think they are we the highest level of nitrate in all the communal well the city owned right now in the city?
Hi, Councillor. Yes, so I can confirm that normally in all of our other groundwater systems, you don't even detect nitrates. So Shadow Ridge well system is the only one where we have detectable levels of nitrates.
And we can say safely that I know that for the people who's listening on YouTube and on Zoom, that what is the level allowed into our drinking water system for nitrate on the guideline from the province?
The maximum allowable concentration is 10 milligrams per liter.
And we're averaging at 3.45, somewhere like that. I know it was higher than the last few years.
Yeah, so between 3 and 4 would be a good average. And as you noted, we are seeing a bit of a leveling off trend, but a bit too soon to confirm if that'll continue to be the case. So in an abundance of caution, we are still moving ahead with the drilling of new wells. So we'd be going deeper into the aquifer, and the test results right now demonstrate that there are no nitrates at that level.
Thank you. Just to confirm that you will be still, even though we are leveling off, we are still continuing with the solution that the city staff presented to the community on deepening the well. And we have we're still on schedule. I know we're 1 year behind because of the property and the acquisition of where the location of the well. Can you confirm that, please?
Yeah, I can confirm that with you, Councillor. So we are proceeding ahead with new wells for Shadow Ridge.
But Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Tammy and her team. I know they've been always in constant update. I know there is some concern in that area, but we've been working very diligently around it. But I want to thank you, Tammy, and thanks, Mr. Chair, for allowing me asking this question for the community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeRuse, and thank you, Tammy Rose, for that response. Just for the layman, when you hear things like high level of nitrates, that's often caused. We had an issue in Manzik years ago. It's often caused by an oversaturation of septic systems in a certain area, and the effluent from those septic systems, and what it does to the groundwater. And what we have in Shadow Ridge community in Greeley is not an unsafe environment, but it is something of concern that we feel is necessary to address. Hence the plan to go forward with new wells for that community to resolve that sort of creeping level of nitrates in the water there. So thank you. So item C was the Solid Waste Master Plan Phase 1. So you recall back in April, we held a very successful technical briefing, which participation from every member here certainly, and all members, many members of council. So we put that forward here. Originally, that was to come to Environment Committee back at the end of March. We did a technical briefing instead. We were moving on with Phase 2 of our Solid Waste Master Plan, and this is merely that summary report for Phase 1. We will report obviously on their subsequent phases when the time comes back at committee.
Chair, I just have a quick comment on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just to staff, we had a discussion a while ago about the material that was being produced from the green bin organics, and understanding what the soil composition was, that sort of thing. Is there going to be an update at some point in the next few months on the composition of those organics, or is that something that's coming later on? I recall we were going to do this, and I know COVID hit, but I just wanted to get a brief comment if there's some update on that.
Do you mean like the plastic particle capture and whatnot? Because I know they did make some adjustments to their screening process. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. Yeah, just in terms of the actual product that comes out, if there's been if there's any change.
Yeah, Councillor, it's Kevin Wiley. We can, as just to remind councillors that it's fully regulated through the province and the tests go to the province for to be analyzed. But I can certainly get that awareness to the councillor if that'd be helpful.
Thanks so much, Kevin. That'd be great.
Thank you, and I forgot to thank Kevin Wiley as well. His work on the tree bylaw matter as well. Ultimately, you guys know it's all Martha. So really, I'm just thanking you as a token gesture.
Scott,
Yes,
sorry if I could just add to that. What I'm curious about with that is the rollout of the green bins into the parks. That was planned last year, and I'm sure COVID has disrupted it. But I want to make sure that there's still a plan to get as many green bins as possible out into the park so we can divert that waste.
Chair, absolutely. That will be coming forward as part of our master plan refresh phase 2 later in the fall.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. So item D was an update on pollinator initiatives. You recall that we had that matter come forward from Councillor Egli, and this is just an update on that matter. And item E, and I'm really surprised, I'm honestly surprised that there's no delegations on this. This is my reports on a trip to Chattanooga, which I am required to report on, to look at potential waste solutions for the city of Ottawa. So this is something that, if you recall, the Plasco situation and how that did not work out for the city. Obviously, there will be more opportunities to look at options in the future. And this was just something where it came up where there was an opportunity to go look at a potential solution, and there are still ongoing discussions as to what that can be. The intent, at least my intent, what I think would be ideal would be that we look at multiple opportunities over the course of the next several years to see what can be done, what can be as different solutions for Ottawa's waste stream. And this was a part of that. So we'll keep councillors informed as to whether or not this materializes in anything. But certainly it's something that our staff in solid waste services are still working on and still looking at.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Chair?
Of course you can.
The report doesn't go into much detail about what you actually saw down there, like what the process was, how does it work, what's the cost per ton, the kind of information that we would need as a council and committee to make informed decisions on whether this is an option we want to consider. So while I really appreciate your insight and everything on that one, if it is possible to get some more detail on that, and any going forward, if we could perhaps maybe come up with some questions such as the ones I just mentioned and more that you could provide answers to in each and every report going forward.
Yeah, so this year was really exploratory. I mean, it was a lot. It was almost like a bit of a give and take type situation where Marilyn Cherneau accompanied me. Obviously, her expertise on the solid waste file and her involvement with Plasco obviously gives a lot of insight into how things need to go at the city. And we were talking about tonnages and different things. We provided some insight to them on what they need to do to operate in Ontario. And at this point, we're not at a stage where we would even consider coming to council and saying, here's where we're at with that. Here's what we want you to vote on. We would never put something in front of you without those details and without that full information. So all the questions that you're asking, all the questions that really need to be built into the Plasco model is something that we will look at with every other model that we even consider here in terms of the cost and all that stuff.
With all due respect, I think that's how we got into the problem with Plasco, was that there was too few people involved in the decision-making process. So I'd like early on for the committee and council to have a lot of information about these different options so that we as a committee under your leadership can make an informed decision.
Yeah.
So can we get some commitment to make sure that we get more detail on that, please?
Yeah, you've always, in fairness, you've always had that commitment, but yes, I can commit with that to right now as well.
Okay, and to our Canadian franchise owners for Tim Hortons, we can leave out the reference to Krispy Kreme.
Well, they they don't have great Tim Hortons in Chattanooga, and my kids would like Krispy Kreme. So come on, don't give me a hard time here.
All right, thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Meehan, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Was this a fact-finding mission? Was this associated with CBA, the local company who's teamed up with the American environmental company that's incinerating? It's a new type of incineration.
I wouldn't call it incineration, but yeah, it's you're talking about GBA.
Yes.
Yeah, so Graham Bird, yeah, that's right. So it's the company's called Landera, and there was they have a headquarters or a test facility in Dunlap, Tennessee, and that's what this was. So obviously the regulatory framework in a place like Tennessee is different than in Ontario. They have been working with an environmental scientists in Ontario out of Peterborough to work through some of where they would need to be in order to actually operate in Ontario. We get approached by a lot of folks that could never operate in Ontario. Ontario is one of the more difficult places to operate, to get environmental approval for technologies on waste solutions. I know I had one that is looking at setting up in Alberta. Well, Alberta is actually on the lower end of environmental regulations when it comes to these types of technologies. So the notion of coming to Ontario is an uphill battle for many of these waste providers. So the information that we can provide to help them work toward that is also important too, because we have a fairly steady waste stream. We have some requirements that we are not looking at doing everything all at once. Whereas in these other jurisdictions, it's you throw everything in and you take care of it all. We're looking at a lot more of a drier waste stream because we're taking out the organics, and the intent is to continue taking out organics, to continue working towards diversion and waste reduction, and only dealing with what's left over. And that doesn't always fit into every one of these waste models.
Understood, and I respect that. At what point, though, could we?
With respect, if I could interrupt for a sec, if this matter is to be discussed in depth, it should properly be waived onto the agenda as an additional item.
Ultimately, these types of things will be discussed as part of the solid waste master plan. This was merely just a councilor's report on a trip. I mean, it's not as of now, nothing's come to fruition. If anything does come to fruition, it'll go through a proper procedure, and councilors will be involved in that process.
Do you know how long that might take, Chair?
There is no timeline. It's not my project, so there is no timeline.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so that was it for the various IPDs that appeared on this agenda. Notices of motion for consideration subsequent meeting. I didn't. Nobody circulated any to me, so I do not have any. Inquiries. I know Councillor Brockington has an inquiry at least. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has raised a lot of issues in the community, and in working with the Ottawa South Environmental Action Network, OCEAN, I have a few questions I just want to put on the record with respect to community gardens. So the pandemic has further amplified food insecurity issues across Ottawa. It's also increased the need and desire to expand community gardens. So 3 questions. What restrictions, if any, are there on residential property owners from erecting a vegetable garden, which may include raised beds, on their front yard property, both on the private homeowner land and on the city right-of-way? 2, what opportunities exist to permit community gardens to be erected on community center property? Is Parks and Recs amenable to this possibility? What might be the challenges of this proposal? And finally, which parks in the Hunt Club and Riverside Park communities of River Ward would staff propose to be viable candidates to host a community garden? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other inquiries?
Yes, just briefly, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I have an inquiry. I've sent this off to Chris as well. The draft minutes of the Tuesday, December 17th, 2019 meeting of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management included direction to staff that staff immediately accelerate a climate lens with regard to city procurement decisions. The discussion on record notes that the 2013 Sustainable Purchasing Guideline has no clarity regarding GHG emissions impact of purchases and is not policy, only a guideline. And if staff can please provide an update on updating the procurement policy to include a climate lens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, no other inquiries, I don't believe. You other business, there is none. Adjournments. So our next, I assume that's carried adjournments. You guys are all good with that? Okay, thanks. So our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. Thank you all today. Appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Will that meeting be at Councillor King's house?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we'll be in phase. It depends on if we're in stage 3. And again, we really need to have groups up to a certain number to accommodate that. I don't know if Councillor King is willing to have us there. I mean, I'm really just sort of spitballing when I said that. I did not actually pass that invite on through him. I just made it up. He never actually invited me. I completely just made it up.
I also have a boss to report
yes.
to, so I have to ask the boss first.
That is fair. That is 100% fair.
We will be meeting in person. We will be meeting in person someday before the end of this term. Enjoy your day, guys.